Hello, Kristaps.
Hi, Miķelis. Hi.
Hi. Good to see you and talk to you about some of the things you've been doing with your team in the recent years. And I think the topic is quite interesting and relatively new. And there's still not a general term how to describe what you're doing. How is this type of investment described? So maybe we can start off with a little background. How did you came up with the idea, and how long have you been operating in such a way where you provide your service as an investment, your development team, your design team as an investment?
Yeah, well, great. Super excited to be here as well. Well, the way it started for us is basically that when creating ventures about 5 years from now, we really wanted to create a working place which we would really love for ourselves and our employees. But the other big aspect which comes into our topic today was our experience from being startup founders ourselves and seeing the challenges, and failing and succeeding. So we wanted to build some kind of company that which would solve the problems that we had back then, and that was the main, point from us starting it that way. And we started actually this way from the very beginning. So I guess I will get into more why I think that's very important, but I think it is challenging to change or transition your business model when you've grown a little bit bigger.
Can you briefly just give a general information? How do you work? Like, what does this type of model mean? You're basically a regular service provider that you provide design and development for companies, and that's part of your business. But the other part is investing your work, your service. Maybe you can give a quick intro. How does that look?
Definitely. So if we take an example in a startup founder, the way it would work would be that person would come and pitch to us. And if we say like, okay, we believe in you and your team and your idea, ability to execute, then we will invest in you, and it will not be cash, but it will be time from our, palette of different experts. So it's designers in today's topic, but it's also developers, product owners, growth hackers, investment managers. And we will have the same incentive as you to create a great company. And everyone working at Ventures will also have that very same incentive. So that is the model in a nutshell, basically.
And how's been that model working for you? And did it get widespread approval from startups, or you had to explain it and as a new concept? How did it work, the relationship with the founders?
Yeah, so in the very first beginning, obviously, when you were doing something very new and uncommon, also we started off in Stockholm. It was more difficult to convince someone like, hey, we know what we're doing, but this is our first investment, right? You can imagine. So we had to reach out to our network, and it was more us founders and our personal brand that was very important. But once you grow the model and you show traction, today we have done 25 investments and 2 exits. It's more the numbers speaking for themselves. And we have a team of 50 people. We start in Stockholm, but we actually also have an office in Tallinn, for example, and being across the Nordics and Baltic. So we want to take this type of model and bring it to other places as well.
And I really like this model because you, in a way, you invest in startups and companies where you have stake in their success. You're not just investing your cash; you're actually investing your knowledge, your know-how, and in that way, you're more deeply involved with the growth of the company. But when companies approach you and pitch you, what challenges are they looking for you to solve for them?
I think let me take a little bit more time here. Bear with me, but I think there are, sometimes they realize this and sometimes not. But like being a founder myself and failing a startup, I don't have it in my heart to let other people fail. At least, I want to try to do everything to help them on their journey. And there are at least, I would say, 3 main things to think about and consider. The first part is the problem and solution validation. So if I simplify, it's to make sure that the the startup has the product, that there is actually a demand, that there's someone else willing to use this service and in return pay with money or time. And all literature and I think common sense says that this is really important, but still really many startups fail with this. Statistics show that 40% of the startups that fail, they really fail due to this reason. And I think it's about human nature that if you have an idea you've been very passionate about, it's in your head but also in your heart, you're probably not prone to put it in a place where it might get a lot of critique. So therefore people, especially first-time entrepreneurs, avoid that. And that is very wrong. You should actually put it out there and get a lot of critique. And in the end, it might prevent you from investing a lot of energy and time and money into this, which could have been prevented, like you could have tweaked it earlier. So that is the first problem, the problem and solution validation. The second part, so once you validate it or you just go on, you have to build the actual product. And typically founding teams might have members, that's a good sign, people who can help with building the product. So maybe a CTO or a designer or something like that. But still you're gonna need a lot of different experts as well. So if I take an example in a tech startup that's have some kind of application as the core of their product, you're going to first need designers. You're going to need a brand identity, logotype, UI, UX. You can tell more about this as well yourself, Miķelis. And then you're going to need developers and growth hackers. And in the beginning, the designer is the bottleneck. They have to do all the work, but then it's going to be the developers who take the design and make it into, code it. And then maybe the designer has less to do. And this problem is typically solved by using agencies in general, or freelancers, or contractors in some way. But that gives the third problem, and that's the problem of incentive. So to be very honest, humble, often agencies, their main interest is to be paid, like that the invoice is paid. And there's no wrong with that. Of course, everyone has to have a living and you have to pay salaries. But really, good agencies and freelancers, they have a model where they try to upsell and increase the complexity and scope of the project. And that is good if you're a big company, you need new ideas and so on. But in a venture studio, you're more like, everyone is thinking, okay, how can we do this the simplest, leanest way possible? Because everyone is losing if we create a complex product before we have proved it completely. So people are thinking like, how can we simplify? How can we simplify? How can we simplify? So entrepreneur with very limited resources have the same incentives as the venture studio. So I think those three things, the problem, solution, validation, access of experts, and the same incentives, those three things really make a big difference for founders.
Yep, I think the last point regarding incentives is really, really important, because when the incentives are aligned, then you go much further and you can achieve greater things. And I think the concept is useful in many areas where you provide a service for early startups, be it design or development or legal area. I think the model can be scaled across categories. But I think what is interesting and maybe the tricky part is mechanics. How do you structure the deal? When is the best time to invest? How much do you invest? And how long period of time do you collaborate with the startup? Maybe we can spend a few minutes going into mechanics and like details. How do you structure the deals? What time frame do you allocate to the one particular startup? You mentioned that you have 25 companies in your portfolio. That means you have to dedicate some quality time to each one of those. And how do you approach that? But maybe we can start with just like the simple question: how do you structure the deal? What does it like? The legal issues look like when you start working with new startup on such a collaborative model?
Yeah, so we have there are different models and adoptions, but in general there are three types of models that we use. So, and it depends on the maturity of the company, in a sense. That's the main differentiator. The first one, we are co-founders of a startup. And this is typically done when there is only the founders and they have probably invested something themselves or through family and friends, and it's very early. Then the most common investment type for us is the pre-seed investment type. So then we would invest as any other investor. So we would participate in a share issue with the same valuation as others. We would actually transfer cash to the startup as any other VC. But the difference would be that we would invoice the cash back, and then you would actually have the hours. So that is the second type of model. And the third model, I won't go much into that, but that's when we call it joint ventures with corporations. So if you're a huge corporation, but you don't have this kind of startup mechanisms, you have, all these compliance and difficult things, we could actually go into a joint venture with them, where we would provide the startup knowledge, and they would provide the domain knowledge and expertise, and we would have equity, both of us, in that type of context.
Which one of those methods do you think is the best one, the one that should be scaled more across different companies that want to jump into this kind of investment?
I think it's there's challenges with the first one and the third one. The second one, where you are you're acting exactly like any other VC, is maybe the simplest, because then you have valuation which is set with other VCs together. You often have a lead VC who helps there. So a lot of things are simplified if you do it in that stage. I would say that's the easiest to start with. But I think the other two are also very interesting in solving different problems.
If you work with the first model, where you're kind of acting like a co-founder, how do you draw the borders? How much time do you invest? How much work do you invest? And what's the time frame when you are available to the startup?
Yeah, these are the things that are more complex with the first one, and we often build a hypothesis around that, how much work will be needed to get to a certain level. It's often the seed round. And our basic philosophy, like I talked about before, is that we want the startup eventually to stand on their own legs. So we want them to be rid of the dependency with us as soon as possible. This is like 180 degrees different from any other agency. So what we want to do is that, okay, use our experts as much as possible to make sure but as lean as possible as well, right? To find the MVP and make sure that you reach certain metrics for the seed round. And when you reach them, you should hire your own people and just build on that roadmap. And what we have done there also to innovate is that we actually, in a month from now, will launch our own VC firm where we invest cash in the seed round. So for the startups who have, taken it all the way from the sweat equity fund to the next level, we'll be able to invest cash to basically and help them to recruit their own team, their own developers, designers, etc. Because then okay, there is a demand, we have customers, it's just to scale up, to go into new markets, to build additional features. So I think that is the typical dynamic.
What do you think is the best balance between your portfolio, whether you invest multiple small bets in a lot of companies, or you think it's better to go deep and dive deep in just a few carefully picked companies? What's your approach in building the portfolio?
Yeah, so probably one of the early on mistakes, or I wouldn't say mistakes, but things we did, is that we took quite small tickets sometimes because of we wanted to get in. It was a very attractive investment, but you realize at some point when you're getting to 20 plus investments that even though the active phase for us, where we are doing the development and so on, ends, we still want to help them with raising future rounds, giving advice, help with recruitment. And it takes a lot of energy. So, and it necessarily doesn't matter if you made a huge investment or a small investment. So I think it makes sense actually to think about it in the beginning. That's the way we've done it. If I could redo it, and then the typical ticket for us is maybe around 100,000 euros, something like that, in the pre-seed round. So we always want the founders to be very incentivized themselves. We never take like a majority stake.
You mentioned the early mistakes. Maybe you can share a couple of other mistakes that you learned in your first investments, now that you have a portfolio of 25 companies and you have the first exits already. What were some of the mistakes that companies that are looking for such a model that they should pay attention to, that they should try to avoid, that you have already experienced?
Yeah, so one of the, I mean, I guess this is a mistake that can be related to many founders and entrepreneurs, but it's around people. And like before I tell about the mistake, if it's okay, I'll dive a little bit deeper into our offering for employees as well, so you kind of get the background.
Sure.
At Ventures, yeah, thanks. So at Ventures, it's not only the management or co-founders that hold the equity in the startups. Like we have taken it to the extreme. So everyone working at Ventures is putting a part of their salary into the fund of startups. And this actually creates a super interesting dynamic, right? Because if you, for example, worked ever as a consultant in a project, there's always a risk that you are a risk or, but you might be perceived as a resource, like do this, do that, and then it's 5 o'clock and it's time to go home. Well, in this case, you're actually, the founder knows this guy or girl is putting a part of their salary into my idea. So you're perceived more like a co-founder partner. And that, it goes both ways. So for the founder, they look at you this way and listen to your advice. But you, as employee of a venture studio, you also have to step up, because you're not just a resource that you do your thing and then you pack your bag and go home. You have to think like, what is the big picture? What can I do smarter? What can I do better? Because I'm also part of this and I've invested here. So it is a two-sided thing. And with this model, one of the mistakes, so if I get back to your first question, is that we also, we were 4 founders and all of us are engineers. So we focused a lot on the hard skills in, for example, developers or designers, to have someone that's technically really, really good. But you realize very soon that, the soft skills also are extremely important. This matter, because it won't matter if you're the best coder. You have to see the bigger picture and see like, does this, coding even make sense for this startup at this stage? So I think that is one of the mistakes, that you focus too much on the hard skills, and you have to look at the people you're hiring. That's one of the most important things.
I think that's a really smart way how to assemble a team with the right mindset, with the right incentives. If you don't mind, maybe we can just dive deeper into this team building and how do you incentivize your team. How does that look in practice? Like, do they invest in the whole portfolio? As a team member, if I work at Ventures, do I invest in the whole portfolio, or I get to choose which companies I want to work with and invest only in those? And what happens when I leave the company for X number of years and move on? Do they still keep their investment, or how does the practicalities look like?
Yeah, so we decided early on that everyone gets, a pro rata share in the fund of all the different companies. And the reason for that is that we want to build a culture with collaboration and partnership. So maybe, 2 or 3 people are working on a specific startup, but they might have a challenge, and they're like, hey guys, do you know how can we solve this? Then we want everyone to be incentivized to help and support. So therefore, we believe that it's better to have everyone being part of all the startups, not only the ones you work with. And in terms of people ending ventures, we have the same kind of philosophy that if we deem them to be, they've worked hard and really good, we want them to be still supporters of the startup even after the day they quit. So I think, and that's a great strategy for all company builders, that don't forget the people who decide to go somewhere else. Having great alumni who kind of support your cause, who love ventures and who love our startups, it will always help. They will end up in places where they can open up doors for that startup. So I think it's wise to keep them. But our model also is great, that we have all the ownership is concentrated in one entity. So the cap table from the entrepreneur's perspective, they only have the ventures fund. They don't have 60 different people with small percentages, which would be a mess, like when you raise future rounds.
Yeah, and when you communicate those values in this partnership model, how have you seen that influence the team that you can assemble? Do you see that there are people that are more inclined towards that, and maybe some reject this new position just because they have to invest some part of their salary, or how does this have worked for you?
Yeah, I mean, you're totally right. It's not for everyone, right? I mean, it requires a very special interest and engagement into this. So, as everyone knows, it's really hard to find great designers, developers, experts in there everyone wants them, and it's even harder to find people who have this type of mindset. So that is the challenge, but it also gives us a unique offering in terms of differentiating us from other agencies and companies. So in some cases, or in most cases, it prevents us from recruiting broadly, but it also makes sure that the people we recruit, that they're going to stay for a long time, and they're going to love what they do every day.
How do you keep your team's focus? How many projects or investments can you work simultaneously on? Do you do it once or twice a year, or they pitch you whenever they need your services? How does that look like in a year's agenda?
Yeah, we have a lot of pitches, I would say every day or every second day, to be honest. We are pretty picky, but our vision is really to help founders and entrepreneurs to realize their ideas. So often comes down to what I talked about before, like they haven't validated the problem and solution like properly. So either we can help them with just that part, or we tell them, we give them a list, like do these things. You have to make sure you do that, because no other VC will invest in you either. So try to help them, but we cannot take on them in the program, in the sweat equity investment. So there we can only pick a few companies, and we are growing all the time. I mean, in terms of employees and venture builders. So right now we can take on maybe 5, 6 startups at the same time in Stockholm, and maybe 2 startups in Estonia. But to be honest, the bottleneck is not the startups or the projects, it's the great people that have this mindset. That is the big challenge to find, and for them to find us.
And you mentioned that you've opened an office in Tallinn, and maybe we can end this conversation as we're closing up. What are the plans for your company in the future? When you establish an office in Tallinn, do we see one in Riga in a few years, or what's the big future you're planning ahead?
Yeah, I mean, I'm Latvian myself, although I've grown up in Sweden my whole life, and that would be like my dream, to open up an office in Riga. Unfortunately, to be honest, Tallinn is a little bit ahead of Riga in terms of the startup ecosystem to this date, but that doesn't mean much. So we are definitely going to open up in Riga in 1 or 2 years.
Thank you, Kristaps. It was great to chat with you, and thank you for spending your time and showing and leading by example. And I hope that we see many more design firms and development firms offering their services and investment, and where we see the incentives aligned from the service provider side and also the startup side. And when the incentives are right, I think we can go much further and see much more successful companies get built. So best of luck with what you do, and thank you once again.
Thank you. It was amazing to be here.